Welcome. This is just a short preparation video for you to engage with the readings that we'll be looking at next week or in week 2. So I'd like you to just watch this short presentation so that you have an introduction to the readings and that you can help with a bit of background to why we're doing these readings. So this week we have 2 readings, and the 2 ideas that we'll be considering are what language do students learn in at school, so what the language of instruction, or even if it's not the language officially of instruction, what are teachers using for language, and also the question of who am I in teaching language and teaching language internationally. So in order to look at this, I'd like to just start by giving a bit of background in the shifts in global education, which you may be aware of, but living in Australia, we're often not aware of the larger development that's going on outside of what we might think of as a developed nation. And in many aspects, Australia has an education system where all children go to school, that you can pretty much guarantee there's a fully trained teacher in the classroom, and that systems and services and just the running of the school is done in such a way that children are given every opportunity to achieve. And there's a lot of support and a lot of communication with parents and communities. Because this doesn't happen in many countries, and many countries that don't that have English, you may find yourself in some of these settings. So I'd like to look at what has oriented education in countries that maybe are not like Australia. So during this millennium, we have been engaged in global Millennium Development Goals, and these were set by the United Nations. Donors and governments buy into these things. They must report on them at the end of the period to say how they've progressed on these 8 areas of endeavour, social endeavour. And for us, we're particularly interested, of course, in this idea of education. And when these when these goals were developed prior to 2000, what was seen as very important was getting kids to school, at least in primary school. So this idea of universal primary education meant countries had to show that they were getting all children to school. Now, in Australia, we don't really worry too much about that because we know primary school kids are going to school unless there are particular situations. But otherwise, universal primary education is not something we're thinking about on a daily basis, and yet from the settings I've been in, it's a constant debate. But one of the things about getting kids to school, and there are many reasons children don't go to school, both community and family reasons, distance reasons, all sorts of reasons. But one of the things we realised, or the global community realised once we started this idea of getting kids to school, is what happened when they got there. So was school worth going to? Was there a teacher? Were there any teachers? Were there any systems for children to be educated? And particularly for our purposes, was school in a language that they would understand? When children are going to school in a language they don't understand and that their parents do not understand, it's very hard to get buy-in from the family or from the children. And what's the point? If you can't understand what's going on, why are you going to school? So the Dakar conference in 2000, Education for All, was really started to look at this idea of, well, we want kids to get to school and what's going to happen when they get there. So the Education for All movement, which you find, Google it and there's lots and lots of sites on this, was a global commitment to provide quality basic education. So not just getting to school. When kids got to school, what were they going to get? Were they going to get something that was worth going to school for? Was it quality basic education? And included in this basic education is the idea of, or rather in terms of quality, was it in a language that they would understand? Now, since 2015, we've had new goals, and we're in the middle of these goals, and you'll see that now we've gone from 8 goals to 17 goals. And again, this was really looking at, well, we've sort of got kids going to school, for example, but now our goal is quality education. And of course, quality is a value, so that can be a little bit elastic in some ways, but a lot of work has gone into saying, what is quality? What is this thing? So the agenda for sustainable development in terms of school, and we're working towards 2030 is building strong foundations through early childcare and education. So in many settings now, they're looking to develop early childhood care and education. So making sure kids are healthy and have some basic beginning of education, understanding what education is about. And in that circumstance, first languages become very important. And then providing a quality basic education. Now, basic education usually means to grade 6. In some countries it means to grade 9. What it means in Australia is quite different, but getting kids to have 6 years of good education is quite a struggle in many places. And then we've got scaling up functional literacy levels for youth and adults who lack basic literacy skills. So literacy has become quite a buzzword. What it actually means on the ground is quite difficult at times to work out, and literacy in what language is a huge issue. So does it mean in a language that people already speak, or is it a language that people might need to function in that particular those circumstances? Is it to be able to deal with public servants, that sort of thing? And that the fourth point there is developing literate environments. And this is a very interesting question. I was asked to do an assessment on a community literacy program in the hills of East Timor. So I went up on dangerous roads and into the hills and got up there and thought, oh, isn't this nice? We're all learning Tetum language. Well, people didn't really speak it. Well, they could speak it a bit, but not really. So they were actually learning Tetum and learning to write it. But when I looked around the community, there was nothing to read. And really my question is, why are we teaching literacy skills, reading skills, if there's nothing to read? And of course, what we're saying is not don't teach anybody, it's let's get something to read into communities. So we've really got to think very broadly about these things. So for you, when you're going to teach English somewhere, is there anything to read in English? In many situations, the internet's been a great boon, of course. I have sat and taught people how to use the internet in languages that do not include English, but showing people how to get into sites where they can see languages that they speak. But it also means there's a lot more English to read. So as long as you do have electricity as well as the internet, you can often find something to read in English. But so these are the sorts of things that we have around education globally. So thinking about where English fits into that, and thinking about where other languages also fit into that. And so what we're really looking at is the place of mother tongue. And so the first reading, we'll really look at this. So we're looking at some of the words you'll start to see are L1, first language, mother language, native tongue, native language. Last week, I'm sure you're all aware, last week was International Mother Language Day, the 21st of February, which is celebrated around the world in terms of what's important about mother language and why people have rights around these issues. It's a highly contested and argued across the world. The questions are around we should honour and preserve first languages, the representation of culture, that's how the first argument might be running, versus that students need the power of the target language or the dominant language, that of prestige and power in that community. So are we preserving culture? Are we giving people ways to power? It shouldn't actually be versus. It should be how can we get both of these things happening? So when we talk about we're looking at schooling and having our pedagogical perspective, we need students to get to the target language, but I would say, of course, through first language. So we really need to think about maybe it's not an either or. It might be how do we keep all languages valued, preserved, and used in places where they have the most power. And for those who've looked up some of the words like diglossia, we use particular languages for particular purposes. So we really need to be thinking about what we mean when we talk about one language over another, or can we put languages together? So the first reading, Education in a Multilingual World, is the UNESCO position paper. It's actually a repositioning or reaffirming the 1953 promulgation or declaration on the place of first languages in education. So this is really where do languages fit in a multilingual world? So it talks about minority and majority languages. It talks about language of instruction, which is also called the medium of instruction, or you might see it as MOI. That means medium of instruction. The language that school is delivered in. In Australia, it's usually in English. The paper will also look at MT, mother tongue instruction. So as you're looking through this reading, try and look for these words, what they mean, because this is what we want to be talking about. The difference between medium of instruction and language teaching is an important idea, and for you going overseas to teach English, you need to be able to differentiate between medium of instruction teaching English and language teaching English, because they're two different, related, but different aspects of teaching English. Teaching in English or teaching English, I guess, is the way of thinking about it. Thinking about looking for what the global conventions are that protect first languages. So there's quite a number of them in the reading. Don't need to know them off by heart, but just to see that we have a number of global conventions. That means that international governments have signed and agreed to that protect first languages and the people who speak first languages. So that might be some interesting reading and really thinking about, do we do this in Australia? So what principles you might need to consider when teaching English, not a first language, and when using English as medium instruction or teaching English as a language. So these are the sorts of things to look out for as you are reading, sort of things to be thinking about. We're going to start the tutorial talking about these. And then when you've finished thinking about first languages, you can go to this reading about the internationalisation of higher education, preparing faculty to teach cross-culturally. Now, this seems to have nothing to do with you because you are not a faculty, you are a student in higher education, but I really want to use this reading for the intercultural information it's giving you. So the paper itself is a setting of university staff doing transnational work. That's a good word, isn't it? But there's something for everyone in this reading. So as you flip through it, you'll come to a whole set out of intercultural attributes. So attitudes, knowledge and comprehension, and skills. So as you're looking through this, you might think about yourself, personalise it. What is it? What are these attitudes do you think you have built? Or what are this knowledge and comprehension you have already? What skills do you already possess? Because you've tried this overseas, because you think you have this in the sorts of things you do in your life. What sort of intercultural characteristics or attributes are you already building? And have you even thought about these sorts of things? Because you popping into somebody else's culture or another culture, what is it that you have to draw on, or that you might need to develop so that you do no harm, and that you can build good relationships for learning, and be really thinking about your students in that situation. So also we want to be thinking about which ones we're developing in this subject in our time together. But of course, first you might enjoy watching some of these clips. So maybe even start here and then start reading the article. And just so you know, there is the reading is in the subject folder that the Gopal reading is drawing on the Deardorff reading. So if you really want to have another look, that's there. Or just Google intercultural competence for more information if you're interested in this sort of thing. So I'll wish you happy reading and see you in class.